Hello lovely people, this week I'm back with another book chat, my regular but not monthly roundup of what I've been reading recently.
Sophie Vlogs.
I've just got 4 books to talk about this week, but I feel like I have a lot of thoughts on each of them, so I'm hoping this won't go on too long, hopefully it'll be concise. Shall we dive into it? So I have 2 fiction and 2 non-fiction, and I'm going to alternate them. First up is the favourite of this roundup, The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. Oh my god, I love this book so much. So this was one of the 10 books I set myself to read in 2018, and I had heard a lot of good things, but I didn't really know anything about it, and I absolutely loved every second of this. This is very much character-driven sci-fi, so it's essentially focused on the crew of this spaceship called the Wayfarer. They do like punching holes through to create like quick space travel is the gist. And they take on this mission. They have to just travel a very long way to get there. It's just pretty much all about the characters and the building of this crew. We're sort of, the perspective changes a lot throughout this, but Rosemary is sort of like our entry into this, and Rosemary is a new clerk who is joining the crew. It's like her first space mission stuff. Rosemary has a little bit of a history that she's not really wanting people to find out about, but as she is meeting everyone for the first time, it's a really useful vehicle for you meeting everybody for the first time. And my favourite thing about this book is just the ideas in it. The ideas for aliens, the ideas for different species. Oh, it was just delicious. It reminded me a lot of Farscape, which is one of my favourite TV shows. And the thing about Farscape is the Jim Henson Company did loads of puppet work for the aliens, because the aliens are so there's Leviathans are ships which are sentient, and they bond with a pilot, and a pilot physically is in them and cannot leave them. Like concepts like this, which is like a Farscape concept, if you were to adapt this into a visual medium, I feel like you would so need someone like the Jim Henson Puppet Company to be able to make some of these characters real, because it was just delightful. There was so many delightful characters in this. Dr. Chef is one of my favourites. I think he's just wonderful, and the little Hufflepuff within me loves him completely. And then also a lot of the explorations of gender and sexuality were really quite wonderful and quite just delightful. This was just a delightful read from start to finish. Like, the plot was also good, but what really drew me in and kept me with it was the characters and this sort of found family idea and stuff like that. So if you prefer your sci-fi a little bit more classic, then this might not be for you, but I personally loved every moment of this, and I'm absolutely going to read the rest of it. It was so good. After that, we have Eleanor of Aquitaine by the Wrath of God, Queen of England by Alison Weir. This is a biography of Eleanor of Aquitaine, who was a pretty remarkable woman, to be honest. I've always liked Eleanor of Aquitaine. I come from a very history-loving family. Did a lot of, battle reenactments, National Trust, English heritage stuff as a child. So Eleanor of Aquitaine's always been a historical figure that I'm quite familiar with. So I wanted to read this just to get a bit of actual knowledge. The tricky thing with this book, this was a good read, and I found it very readable. I found it very accessible. My main annoyance, it's not like annoyance is too strong a word. The stumbling block when it comes to this is that when you are looking at a figure from the 12th century, there's not a lot, especially a woman in the 12th century, no matter, she might be immensely powerful and all that sort of stuff, but she's still a woman in the 12th century, and there is a lot of time that we don't really know what she was doing or that sort of thing. So there's a lot of information on the start of her life, when she first married the King of France. She became Queen of France. She went on crusade with him. There's a lot of information about what she was doing during that whole time. And then her marriage with the King of France was annulled. Then she ended up marrying the future Henry II of England. And then there's sort of a middle part of this book, which was frustrating in some ways to read, because it was mainly just telling me about Henry II and about like Thomas Becket and all stuff like this, which was great because it was good to know that stuff in more detail than I previously knew it. But I did have moments reading it where I was like, yeah, but where is Eleanor? And I think the problem is that we just don't really know. Like, she draws a lot on like pipe rolls and like legal documents and stuff like this. Like, looking at like the financial documents of like the royal household is a really good way to be able to tell physically where she was and what they were spending money on. And you can draw things from that, definitely. But like, there was still like a whole middle section of this where I was like, but I wanted to know about Eleanor. So I've definitely come out of this book with more knowledge. I think as well part of it is that a lot of the things we think we know about Eleanor of Aquitaine are sort of embellished inventions on the part of courtly writers like 200 years or so after her death, which obviously does not a historical document make. So a lot of the things you think you know about Eleanor are actually like myths that were a bit over dramatic and stuff. But then, like, for example, when she's acting as Richard I regent while he's away on crusades, stuff like that, like, again, we've got more information about where she is, what she's doing. It was just, so, like, the first part and the last part, you do get a really good sense of Eleanor and who she was as a person. Not even, well, you know, like, what she did. It was just that middle section, and it's not the fault of Alison Weir, because Alison Weir doesn't want to just give you conjecture. She's trying to She's trying to base it on what we actually know. It was just slightly frustrating at times. Then we have The Fisherman by Chigozie Obioma. So this focuses on our narrator Ben is sort of, the narration is sort of him as an adult but also him as a child. It sort of combines them, and he's looking at this really defining time in his family's history when essentially him and his brothers used to go down to the river and they were fishermen, and then one day this madman gives a prophecy that says that one of the brothers will kill the eldest brother, and from that day on their whole lives are changed and everything's different, and it sort of kicks off this chain of events which leads to a lot of tragedy, and a lot of tragedy is definitely really the word for this. You have he does this really good way of focuses really on like the reality of lives, like the messiness of just like existing. And there's a lot of like realistic details of life, and just like, you know, he's walking down the street and everything he's observing, like it's really building up this realistic like view of where he's at, where he lives, that sort of thing. And then with this mythic tragedy that runs through it, and this sort of concept of like how much of what happened couldn't have ever been changed, and how much of it was a direct result of people making choices and could have been changed. It was really interesting. And as the book goes on, you sort of find yourself, like, I read this in a couple of days because I did get very gripped by it. I feel like I either would have read it in a couple of days or taken ages to read it, because that knowledge that there is impending doom and bad things are going to happen and there's nothing you can do to stop them, but you also really need to know what's going to happen, that whole thing just like ran throughout this. One detail I really liked about this is there's like a repetition. So like the back says, Hope was a tadpole, the thing you caught and brought home with you in a can, but which, despite being kept in the right water, soon died. And there's a bit more. And then its mother was a falconer, the one who stood on the hills and watched. Like, that kind of repetition runs throughout here. So you'll be reading and then you'll have a chapter that starts with like, a kenner was a sparrow, and then it describes it. That sort of repetition really helped add to the mythic aspect of this, that almost like oral storytelling repetition of certain phrases and stuff. Every time that happened, it was like a little touch base, and then like the story continued. So it was kind of like each time he has a realization and an understanding about someone, who they really are, that sort of thing. Then you would have a moment like that where it's so-and-so is a blah, and then like a description. And I really liked that detail, that repetition. That was really, really good. And then finally, we've got Breaking Out in the Fight for Gay Rights, Stonewall by Ann Bausum. This is such a small little book. I read it in like a bus journey. This is essentially an introduction to Stonewall, the riots, that sort of thing. I had read before I started reading this some mixed reviews on Goodreads. I would say that that reflects how I feel about it post-reading it. So on the one hand, the language is very accessible, the way it's written is very accessible. I think it's an easy read for sure. On the other hand, I wish it had been slightly more in depth. So it's a very good introduction to the topic. I don't know a lot about the Stonewall riots. That's why I bought this book. However, I know some figures who were involved. Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, these sorts of things. So she mentions Craig Rodwell quite a lot, but that's the only real figure who I really feel like I've really learned about. I was really hoping to learn more about activists who were involved. I was hoping to just learn, I wanted more, essentially. So I'm glad I read this because it was a good introduction, it filled out some of my knowledge, that sort of thing. I think this could have been so much more, and yes, so I'm still looking for a read that is gonna give me what I want. So if you have any recommendations, please let me know. That is it, just a quick summation of my thoughts of those things. If you have any thoughts, please do let me know. Otherwise, I will see you next week for something different.